Jim lives in Texas. He's come all the way over from Texas. He's this is the description Ruth's written for me. Jim Marrs from Texas is a distinguished award-winning investigative journalist and author who specialises in conspiracy-related subjects. His journalistic career was kick-started after he completed his service in the Vietnam War. Joining the Fort Worth Star-Telegram as a reporter, he soon became the newspaper's military and aerospace writer. Among the subjects that Jim investigates are the JFK assassination plot, and he's even taught a course at the University of Texas for 30 years on the JFK assassination cover-ups. He's also done a course on UFOs at the University of Texas. He's done a lot of research into military-funded remote viewing and psychic spying. He's done a lot of research on 9/11 secrecy and, of course, the war on terrorism. He's the author of a book called Crossfire, which was the book that Oliver Stone's movie JFK was based on. He's written Rule by Secrecy and another one called The War on Freedom. He's written Inside Job, The Terror Conspiracy, and both of those are about the 9/11 cover-ups. He's also the author of Psy Spies and Above Top Secret. Jim has contributed several articles on these subjects to Nexus over the years, ranging from the war on terrorism to UFO sightings by US astronauts. Jim is a great raconteur, a fedora-wearing character, and a mine of information about inconvenient truths that the elite controllers would prefer never saw the light of day. This is his third appearance at a Nexus conference, second one in Australia. You appeared, I think, at our conference in Amsterdam a few years ago. And so please give him a big warm welcome back to Australia to our Nexus conference, Jim Marrs.
Thank you, Duncan. Thank you. Did he say I was extinguished? Okay, got a long way to go and a short time to get there, so I'll try to just move right into it. But first, I think I have to preface my remarks by letting you know that once again, I'm on the cutting edge. I seem always to be just a little bit ahead of the time. Sometimes I get a little ahead of myself. Back in the 60s, when it was considered impolite to even talk about the Kennedy assassination in public, I was saying, hey, it was a big conspiracy, okay? So I was the conspiracy theorist and the nut. In the early 70s, I was saying Richard Nixon is a crook and he will not serve out his second term. And by the way, Vietnam is already lost. We're just going to lose there. We might as well just get out now and save lives. And of course, I was the conspiracy theorist and the nut and probably unpatriotic. It all proved to be true, of course. And it just comes right on up to 9/11, and we are now in the same situation with 9/11 that we were for 15 years after the JFK assassination, which is, at least in America, it's considered impolite to just even bring that up and talk about it, in decent company. But I'm here to tell you just flat out, with no fear of contradiction, that 9/11 was an inside job. Okay, it's just, and what makes it all the more horrendous is that we are now still engaged in bloody warfare in Iraq and in Afghanistan. And what's the precedent for that? 9/11. Well, if 9/11 was a fraud, then we're fighting these wars on fraudulent basis. It's just incredible. And of course, but you can't say that because, once again, I'm just the conspiracy theorist and the nut, and again, possibly unpatriotic. But we'll cover that a little bit more in detail. So I've always been just a little bit ahead of the game, and today I'm ahead of myself here in Australia because I'm going to tell you about my latest book, The $1 Trillion Conspiracy: How the New World Order, Man-Made Diseases, and Zombie Banks Are Destroying America. The good news is that this book was released for publication on June the 29th, all right, just 2-3 weeks ago. The further good news is, as of last Sunday, it had already reached number 16 on the New York Times bestseller list. All right. The bad news is that it is so recent that I was unable to get any copies down here to Australia. So, you can't get any. I am so sorry. But anyway, I'll give you a little preview, and then y'all can watch for it, because I'm very confident that within a few weeks or months or however long, you will be able to get the $1 Trillion Conspiracy down here. So, moving right along. There's the cover. And I'll tell you a quick little story. When they sent me the first rendition of the cover, it was exactly as you see here, except for the graphic. The graphic was a big picture of George Washington as he appears on the $1 U.S. bill. And I wrote him back immediately, and I said, you know, why are you laying this off on poor old George? George didn't have anything to do, you know, with what's going on right now. I said, if you want to really present a picture of what's going on, use the other side of the $1 bill where we have the Great Seal. Yeah, look, I think I can use this right up here, where we have the words Novus Ordo Seclorum, which when I was a kid they told us meant the new order of the ages. But Novos, of course, is new. Ordo means order. And seclorum comes from the root word Latin, that where we get the word secular, which means the material world. Okay, so you can translate it as new world order. And and then you can see the mysterious all-seeing eye of the pyramid, the 13 steps. This is very Masonic, and that's another thing too. I'm going to encourage all of you. I'm going to tell myself I wasn't really aware that I was supposed to make 2 talks here. So tomorrow, Duncan put down that I'm going to talk about 9/11, but I'm going to cover the high points of 9/11 pretty much today, and then maybe a little bit tomorrow. But tomorrow, I would encourage you all to come see my presentation, because I'm going to shift it a bit, and I'm going to show you a little presentation called Hidden History, and I'm going to go all the way back to Atlantis and bring it forward to Barack Obama and show you who's been doing what and why. Okay, so I encourage you to see that. The new book, The $1 Trillion Conspiracy, touches on the financial meltdown in the United States, and of course that has ripples all around the world. What caused this crash? Liar's loans, bad food and water, Codex Alimentarius. If you don't know about that, you better find out, because they were working very hard to take away your vitamins. If they get their way, working around, you know, making an end run through the United Nations and their Codex Alimentarius, you're going to find that you're going to have to go pay a doctor to get a prescription to get vitamin C. Biological weapons, and how that man-made diseases are now debilitating the entire human population, drugging the population, swine flu hoax. If you remember this time last year, we were all scared to death. The swine flu is going to get us, you know. Of course, I had already figured out the solution to swine flu. You know, you take an ointment. All right. I said I had a lot of them. I didn't say they were any good. Dumbed down education, and I'm sure this holds true in Australia as well as the United States. In fact, I will apologize in advance. Most of this talk, most of the things I'm talking about, were geared towards, of course, what's happening in America. But I feel very certain that, number one, you guys, and I tip my hat to every one of you, because just the sheer fact that you're here shows me that you've got an open mind, open ears, and that you want to learn, you want to know what's really going on. And I'm sure you can find something that's I'm talking about that's mostly pertaining to America, but that you can also and equally apply here in Australia. And while I'm on it, I just feel great to be back in Australia. I love Australia, and despite the winter weather, weather. I love it. In Texas right now, it's like 100 degrees Fahrenheit. All right, and so this is heavenly to me. I love it. Everybody I'm running, oh, I'm cold. You know, you're cold. You don't just. This isn't cold. This is great. I started to go swimming yesterday until my common sense got the better of me. I said I'd probably freeze, stiffen up, and then I'd be shark bait, right? But I appreciate being here. I appreciate seeing all of you, and thank you all for coming out. And you have my utmost respect and honor simply because I know that each and every one of you in your own way are trying to find truth and trying to find out what's really going on. And in the same token, let me say, don't believe a word I say. Okay, I'm not asking for your belief. I'm not a politician. I'm not an evangelist. Okay, so I'm not trying to tell you that I've got it all. Listen to me. You know, I got a direct conduit with God. Nah, I just study. I got a good classical education. I'm not stupid. I'm well read. I got my eyes and ears open. I got lots of contacts. My wife says that I'm an information magnet. Because every day I get literally hundreds of emails from all around the world, from Europe, yes, even Australia, all the places, and they all send me these stories, you know. And it's stuff that normally I probably would miss, but here they all come. So I correlated, I'll try to figure out what does all this mean, try to connect the dots, and I'm here to tell you what I know and what I've learned, and you can take it or leave it, okay? Because I'm not a revolutionary. I'm not trying to tell anybody what to do. I'm trying to give you information and then try to encourage you to use that God-given computer you've got up here and figure out where the truth is, what's really going on, and then I would exhort you to act on it. Because, folks, the time has passed for us to just go, well, gee, that's interesting, and sit around and think about it, you know, because that's what we've done for the last 40, 50 years, and you can see where it's gotten us. Once you figure out what the truth is, once you figure out what needs to be done, then by golly, get out there and try to get something done about it, okay? So let's move right along. You've heard about the tea parties in the United States. You have not been told the truth. The tea parties are in every state. The solid tax-paying Americans are extremely upset with what's going on. And I think you're going to see a real shift come November and the off-presidential year elections. And yet the media, which is under total corporate control, tries to downplay this. And then also the party political system, Republicans, Democrats, they're both controlled by the same people, as you'll see. They have tried to co-opt the Tea Party movement, which is truly a grassroots movement. And they've tried to co-opt it by trying to bring in Sarah Palin and these various people. Oh, well, yeah, we're all for this, and try to shift them into voting Republican, you know. Well, you know, we just got through having 10 years of Republican, and all it did was get worse. So it's time in the United States to forget party politics, and I would submit to you that in Australia it's probably the same thing. Forget the party politics and start looking for the politicians who will look out for you, not for their party or not for their philosophy. Benjamin Franklin wrote, "The colonies would gladly have borne the little tax on tea and other matters had it not been that England took away from the colonies their money, which created unemployment and dissatisfaction." This is extremely important for you guys to understand. Money is the key to the whole thing. Money is the control mechanism. And as he said, I was taught in school, and you probably have been taught too when it comes to the American Revolution, oh, they fought it over that tax on tea. No way. They fought because their money was taken away. The colonies were issuing what was known as colonial script, and this was issued through the various colonies, and it was based on the available work, labor, and services, and they were prospering because the money was solid. It was backed by something, okay? And they did not have to pay interest on their money. Well, of course, this did not sit well with the financial powers of Europe, namely the Rothschilds. And Baron Rothschild, of course, controlled the Bank of England. So they twisted the arm of the royals, and they had King George approve a law, and it was passed in Parliament, that made colonial script illegal. You had to deal in Bank of England notes, interest-bearing notes. And this was the cause of the revolution. and others through history have certainly understood this. Lenin said, "The surest way to destroy a nation is to debauch its currency." Well, we see that happening in the United States, and I venture to say it's also happening in Australia. He also said, "Give me 4 years to teach the children, and the seed I've sown will never be uprooted." So if you can condition the children to think in a certain way, to believe that socialism is the wave of the future, the way to go, then by the time they get to high school, they're already caught. They can't think in any other way. So going back again, the United States tried to, one of the biggest bones of contention since the Revolution and the founding of the Republic and the Constitution was the question of whether or not we should have a central bank. Well, they tried it. Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson were the two opposite sides of the coin. Jefferson said, you know, banks are worse than standing armies. Hamilton said, no, the rich people, they know how to handle money, so they should be in charge. And this was a big contention. So they actually, thanks to Hamilton, tried the Bank of the United States and then the Bank of America. They tried twice, 3 times actually, to have a central bank, and each time the bank was corrupt. The bank charged exorbitant interest rates, and the bank was responsible for farmers falling into debt, losing their farms, etc., etc. And, of course, by the 1830s, Andrew Jackson, the first president born west of the Mississippi, said, that's it, they're a den of vipers, and he did away with the central bank. For his trouble, they tried to impeach him, but he missed being impeached. Now, think about that. He gets impeached because he was shutting down a central bank. Bill Clinton gets impeached because he's having sex with an intern. Jeez. How far we have come. Okay. So all through the late 1800s, there was no central bank. I also might mention that twice in American history, 2 American presidents have tried to issue their own currency, not through the Federal Reserve System or through the international bankers, but by issuing it through their own Treasury Department. And one was Abraham Lincoln, who said, in effect, that issuing money was one of the key privileges of government, okay? So he issued greenbacks, non-interest-bearing notes, to finance the war between the states. The other president was John F. Kennedy, who in June of 1963 issued $4.2 billion in United States notes. I have a couple of examples of this, of a $5 bill that was United States note. It's got red ink on it. It does not say Federal Reserve note. It says United States note. This was money issued through the Treasury Department. What's the difference? $5, $5. The worth of it is not any different. The difference is that through the Federal Reserve System, you have to pay interest on the money. You issue the money through the Treasury Department, you don't pay interest on the money. And if you know anything about finances, you understand that the biggest bulk of the yearly budget of the United States goes to, quote, retire the national debt, which is a fancy way of saying paying interest on the money we owe. And I don't think that it was some sort of coincidence that both Lincoln and Kennedy were shot in the head in public. This is what happens when you mess with the moneyed people. We got the Federal Reserve System through this man, Paul Warburg, a German banker, who came to the United States and participated in 1910 in the meeting at J.P. Morgan's hunting lodge on Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia, where he met with the big bankers, and they said, we've got to set up a system. And they said, but we cannot call it a central bank. So what emerged from that was finally passed into law on December the 24th, Christmas Eve, with most of the Congress away for holidays and everyone clearly distracted by Christmas, and they rammed through the Federal Reserve Act in 1912. This created the Federal Reserve System. Now, the way it works is pretty simple. Congress authorizes debt. Congress says, okay, we need more money, so let's issue another $100 million. So then once they authorize this debt, then the Federal Reserve System spends a few $100 on paper and ink and prints up $100 million and distributes it out through the country, through their 12 regional banks. Now they turn around and charge the government. Do they charge the government for the few $100 they spent on the paper and the ink? No. They charge the government for $100 million. And we have to pay the interest on it. It's just nuts. And here he is as head of the first Federal Reserve Board of Directors. Now what's interesting is that as war clouds gathered in 1915, 16, and 17 came and the United States got involved in World War I, it was Paul Warburg, the German banker, who was put in charge of loans and of war bonds and of the finances for World War I. Meanwhile, in Germany, his brother, Max Warburg, here he is, was head of the Warburg Company, principal stockholder in Germany's Reichsbank, which was financing the German war effort in World War I. Max Warburg also was a co-founder of IG Farben, and I don't have to tell you that IG Farben at that time was the largest chemical combine in the world and went on to become one of the major foundations for Hitler and the Third Reich. It was also Max Warburg who, operating in a capacity as an intelligence chief in Germany, helped arrange the sealed railroad car that passed through wartime Germany and took Lenin into Russia to take over the Russian Revolution for the Bolsheviks, which became the communists. The theological head of the communists was Trotsky, was in New York, working for Wall Street capitalists and living on Rockefeller land rent-free. He then was sent by Joseph Schiff, another big Wall Street capitalist, with millions of dollars and a boatload of revolutionaries to Russia, again to take over the Russian Revolution and change it into communism. Interestingly enough, the boat was stopped in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and the Canadian authorities said, wait a minute, we know you, and we know that you've already made publicly stated that you're going to Russia and you're going to take Russia out of the war, which is going to free up millions of German soldiers to come over to the Western Front and face our Canadian boys. We're not going to let you go, so they impounded the ship. Well, not a bad investment. Total profit, $4.6 billion. But he doesn't get to keep all that. The mortgage holders got a portion of that money, and the largest mortgage holder in the World Trade Center was Blackstone Group, whose CEO is Peter G. Peterson, who I'm sure by just some coincidence, head of the chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations. So now you see at the level that the money flowed on that deal, and this is why you're never going to learn the truth of it. Quickly return to the Pentagon. Something blew up at the Pentagon, but look at this picture. The walls are bowed outward, not pushed inward. Something blew up inside the Pentagon. And here's the one picture that you've probably never seen. This is the hole in the west side of the Pentagon before the wall collapsed. And as you can see for yourself, it's only about 10 to 12 foot high, and it's less than 20 foot wide. And as you can also see, there's some fire going on here. These windows appear to be intact. These windows appear to be intact. And this car, even though it's scorched on one side and damaged, the paint, white paint's still good. Wait a minute. How does a aircraft with a 125-foot wingspan, two-ton titanium steel jet engines, and a 4-story high tail fit through this little bitty hole? And, by the way, I interviewed a woman named April Gallup who crawled through this hole to escape with her small child. And they said, oh, the plane buried itself in the building and just blew up, and there was such an intense fire, it just melted the whole plane. And it just went away. Well, if that's the case, how come she's still alive? Here's what a plane crash looks like, and I've been to many of them. Usually the tail breaks off, so you have an intact tail section. Wings will break off. You usually find an intact wing, and you always have the engine, because they're made with titanium steel blades, and they don't burn and they don't do anything. They just lay there. Well, now here's the Pentagon prior to the wall collapsing. Where's the airplane? Where's the tail assemblies? Where are the wheel assemblies? Where's anything? It's not there. And here's finally then the wall collapses, and again, where's the airplane? It's just green grass over here. And here's what I love. Now the wall collapses, and we find that everything looks clean and bright on the inside. Here's a wooden table with a book on it. Here's a wooden desk. Here's a plastic computer monitor. Where's that giant fire? In fact, this is how stupid they think we are. First they said the plane exploded in a fire and it burned up everything. The whole plane was just, reduced to nothing, immolated by the fire. And then a few weeks later they said, but we have identified the victims by their fingerprints. What? I interviewed a Sergeant Lauro Chavez of the Central Command, and he said that morning they were doing war game exercises, and one of the exercises was a hijacked airplane being crashed into the World Trade Center. And when they heard that this was actually happening and they switched on CNN and they saw the North Tower burning, said their jaws hit the floor. They said, how could this happen? How could something we're programming and as an exercise actually happen in real life? And as part of the exercise, he said they were putting false images on the FAA radar screens, 22 to 24 inputs representing hijacked airplanes on the FAA radar. They didn't know what was real and what wasn't. And when they first contacted NORAD and said, have you got interceptors in the air, the first question was, well, is this the real world or is this the exercise? That's how they confused the whole thing. And who would have known about that? How did the hijackers know to coincide their attack with the war game exercises? Then we get the 9/11 commission report, full of omissions, 125 more omissions. For example, how did the official 9/11 Commission, how did they explain the collapse of Building 7? They didn't. They didn't even mention it. How's that for investigation? And to show you what a puny investigation it was, total cost of the 9/11 investigation was $13 million. First off, they dragged their feet for 2 years until the families finally pressured President Bush into appointing a commission to find out what had happened on 9/11, and he funded them for $3 million. They couldn't even take that. They said, hey, we can't do this for $3 million, so he reluctantly upped it another $10 million, and it ended up costing $13 million to investigate the worst terrorist attack on the American soil in history. And yet, in 2004, according to the Republican National Committee, they spent $60 million, 4 times more, on inauguration festivities for George W. Bush. So you can see what was more important, 3,000 American lives in the largest terror attack, or parties for George W. Bush. So we know a lot now, and it's all in my book, The Terror Conspiracy. Now, it was an inside job. Well, I've always been asked, so where's the proof? Here's one proof. The senior counsel to the 9/11 Commission, John Farmer, last year published a book, and he wrote, in the course of our investigation of the national response to the attacks of 9/11, the Commission staff discovered that the official version of what had occurred, that is, what government and military officials had told Congress, the Commission, the media, and the public about who knew what and when, was almost entirely and inexplicably untrue. That's their own senior counsel. He says there was an agreement at some level of government, at some point in time, there was an agreement not to tell the truth about what happened. So, folks, I ask you, if the senior counsel of the 9/11 Commission, and by the way, the 2 directors too, Keene and Hamilton, they both have expressed questions and doubts about their own conclusion. Well, if the people who are in charge of the own government investigation says it's untrue and we have doubts about it, then why am I, conspiracy theorist, trying to raise question about what happened to 3,000 of my fellow countrymen? And finally, we have the Open Chemical Physics Journal of 2009, which published in Holland, I believe. And in a peer-reviewed scientific paper, they concluded that in all samples of the World Trade Center debris, they found traces of an unreacted thermetic material incorporating nanotechnology and is highly energetic, pyrotechnic, or explosive material, thermite. And its nanotechnology counterpart, thermate, which is a military-controlled explosive only obtainable through the U.S. military. There's the proof. And yet, no American who watches TV or reads the New York Times or the Washington Post has ever seen this. It has not been reported on. So, what do? The reason we don't know anything is because the media in the United States is now under control of 5 corporations. Time Warner, Disney, Vivendi, Viacom, News Corporation, which is your own Rupert Murdoch, and Bertelsmann, the Nazi printer that was the largest publisher of Nazi propaganda to the German army during World War II, and they now are the largest publisher in the English language. My new book, The $1 Trillion Conspiracy, for the first time in my experience, I've had some canceled on me very mysteriously, but for the first time I was actually censored. I was on a phone conference with my senior editor. Luckily, my agent was on the phone, overheard everything. My senior editor said, "I did not contract for this section. I want you to take it out." And I said, "No, I think it's important people understand this and know this. It's fully sourced. There's no legal problem with it." He said, "Well, let me put it this way. If you don't take it out, I won't publish the book." And what section do you want me to take out? The section about how corporate media censors the news. So I said, "You kind of proved my point, didn't you?" And he tries to argue with me saying, "Oh, no, if I don't let you publish something, that's not censorship. It's only if you publish something and we don't distribute it." And I said, pardon my French, "You're full of shit." The other thing they took out was the 2 million man march, Tea Party. September the 12th, 2010, an estimated 2 million Americans marched on Washington, okay, demonstrating against Obama's bailouts and against the health care plan. It was not reported on. Another thing they took out was the... I'm sorry? Oh, that's my fault. It was 2009. I was doing this slide in 2010. I've corrected it somewhere else, but I didn't correct it here. Mea culpa, I'm sorry. It was September the 12th, 2009. Never mind my title. Interlocking boards of directors. That shows who's actually controlling the media. They took that out. They also took out a false picture of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda means literally the base. And early on I thought, well, it must refer to their headquarters somewhere. And yet Robin Cook, former leader of the British House of Commons, said bin Laden was armed by the CIA, funded by the Saudis to wage jihad against the Russian occupation of Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda, literally the base, was originally the computer file or base of thousands of mujahideen who were recruited, trained to help the CIA to defeat the Russians. So in other words, Al-Qaeda actually refers to the CIA database that they can draw on for mercenary Arabs to do whatever they pay them to do. The whole war on terrorism is a fraud. I haven't got time to go into it, but the explosions in Madrid, the bombings in London, 9/11, these were all false flag operations carried out by paramilitary organizations to create the idea that there is this huge international, Al-Qaeda terrorist group intent on slipping weapons of mass destruction into the United States. Well, folks, I'll simply ask you this. If that's true, then how come they have not done the one common sense thing, which is to secure the borders of the United States? They haven't done it. They still haven't done it. and we're still having problems. They could march a battalion of terrorists in through the sieves that we call the southern border and Canadian border of the United States. If they were serious about an international terrorist group, they would tighten up the borders, but they haven't done it yet, and they haven't done it now. Another thing they took out, haven't got time to get into this, but the tantalizing evidence that Barack Obama is a young Muslim male who spoke several foreign languages, including Farsi, raised in Indonesia. He was a perfect recruit for the CIA. This explains how he's able to travel to Pakistan when no American with an American passport could get into Pakistan, and how he was able to move all around, how he's able to suddenly show up at Harvard with no particular academic background, and why he went to Columbia and said he was so popular and did so many great things at Columbia, and yet they interviewed 400 people in his class at Columbia, and not one of them even remembered him being there. And of course his school records and his birth certificate are still sequestered, kept from the public, and this is because it would have shown that he was a legend, a creation of the CIA. But I can't say that. The top censored stories of 2009, that was censored out too. So the rest of the thing I have is things that Americans can do to try to remedy the situation. And I think I'm out of time, so I'm going to make it real quick. First, we have to rescind these presidential orders that keep secret and classified the papers of former presidents. How can they do that? This was pushed through by George W. Bush to protect his father, but Obama's gone along with it. He too says you can't look at their papers. Why? How do we know what our leaders are doing if we can't look at their papers? Federal Reserve System, we need to at least audit it, if not abolish it. We need to remove Congress from the special federal employee retirement system and put them on Medicare and Social Security, and watch how fast they clean it up. But they're not under that. No one who has ever served as an intelligence agent, whether military or civilian, should ever allow to be president, prime minister, or chief executive of any country, because they've been brought up in a whole culture where deceit is the name of the game. You don't want that. No, prohibit any intelligence people from serving you as a leader. Lobbyists. Right now, there are probably 5 to 10 lobbyists for every congressman in the United States. There should be a law that says only one lobbyist can go and talk with a congressman at any one time, any representative. And when they go, they should be accompanied by a public advocate who goes with them to argue the case for the public. That might help some things. We need to curtail the lifelong judges on the Supreme Court, and while we're at it, we need to curtail the limits of senators and politicians who should not be in there. In America, they're not supposed to be permanent professional politicians. They're supposed to be citizens who go up and devote a year or 2 or 3 or 4 to serving as a representative of their public and then return to the private sector. Instead, they go up there, stay there for life. Ted Kennedy's a good example. But of course, the problem is that any of these reforms is going to require an act of Congress. Are they going to vote themselves to reduce their salaries, to put themselves on Medicare or Social Security, to put themselves and reduce their own tenures in office? No. So what do? I'm hoping, and there's a lot of people pushing, this year in November, we vote them all out. And you all might consider that. If you get tired of what your parliament's doing here in Australia, vote them all out. Yeah, you're going to lose a few good ones. You're going to lose the bad ones. You're going to lose some in-between ones. But if you vote them all out one time, then you have shown them that you're boss, and maybe they'll start listening to you. And, of course, in America, we have a real problem because, to paraphrase Stalin, he says, I don't really care how anyone votes. I only care who counts the votes. And we have a real problem with electronic voting machines, and I'm not sure what the situation is here, but if you have electronic voting machines, you need to get rid of those because there's no paper trail and you have no guarantee that your vote is being counted. Need to return to paper ballots. Need to establish a real education system. no secret society members should belong to Congress or to your Parliament because they take oaths of allegiance that supersede their oaths to their country and to you. We need to do away with the Patriot Act, which is nothing more than just an updated version of Hitler's Enabling Act. And we need to have no more cover-up commissions. And we need to enforce the 10th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States, which states that anything that is not power that is not specifically delegated to the federal government belongs to the people in the states. But let me tell you where we are, folks, and you're not hearing anything about this, but it's going to get worse. In Tennessee, they passed a law that said if you own a firearm in Tennessee and it's not going out of the state or it's made in Tennessee, then you are exempt from federal firearms laws and regulations. Because the only reason that the federal government got involved in firearms was through a little clause in interstate commerce. If it's interstate commerce, then that gives the federals authorization to regulate and to pass laws. The gun dealers in Tennessee wrote to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and said, wait a minute, what about this? And I have seen a letter from the head of the BATF to the gun dealers in Tennessee where, after blah, 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 he states, disregard the state law. So in other words, we are being turned into a central authority, totalitarian state that supersedes any local representation. The same thing that the war between the states was fought about, and it's going to come to push and shove at some point. We need to uphold the Posse Comitatus Act, which says, that was passed in the 1800s, said you cannot use the military to police the civilian population. This is what police officers used to be, and I was always brought up to respect police officers. If you have a problem, go seek out a policeman. He'll help you out. And look today. Now they're dressed in German-style helmets and body armor and carry automatic weapons, and it's more like stormtroopers. Legalize pot. Legalize marijuana. There is so many benefits we could get from this. Australia, too. Little taxation would bring in millions and millions of dollars, and it's not hurting anybody. In the United States today, it is still illegal to grow industrial hemp that has no psychoactive properties. We import our hemp. How stupid is that? And now they've even ran through hate crimes. If you say something, you know, how many of you remember the childhood verse that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, okay? Who's to determine what's hate and what's not hate? Forget that. If somebody attacks someone, if somebody steals something, try them. Throw the book at them. But just because somebody is prejudiced, stupid, you know, says bad things, you know, just ostracize them. Don't pass laws about it because these laws can get out of hand real quick. And America is still the largest exporter of arms in the world, and then we talk peace. How hypocritical can you be? We need to curtail the arms industry. We need to curtail the pharmaceutical industry. Up until a few years ago, you never saw an ad on TV for drugs, and now that's just about all you see. And that's why you don't hear about the problems with drugs, because none of the media wants to antagonize their largest advertiser. Again, Codex Militaris, fight that. Fight that. We should be free to use anything that we want to on ourselves. It's our own lookout. And it comes down to, are we in America a nation of law, or are we a lawless nation? Well, that's what the birth certificate issue is all about. It's not about Obama. It's not about race. It's not about religion. It's about, do we follow the Constitution? Are we a nation of law, or are we a lawless nation? Unfortunately, it appears that we're a lawless nation. But to keep in mind that it's not fascism when we do it. And also remember, anything that's not voluntary is tyranny. And, of course, we still have some hope in the United States because, unlike Australia, we still have our guns. So get the $1 trillion conspiracy. You'll find out what's wrong and what to do about it. And I thank you for your time.
Fantastic, Jim. Thank you. I just wanted to put a little rider on there in terms of Australian parallel situations. In some ways, we're a bit further ahead down the road than America. We've already got hate crimes. We've already got them. And one of the conspiracy agendas for the future of Australia, you might want to take this aboard. When I was doing some chin wagging with a guy called Peter Sawyer back in the 1980s, he was he was a public servant who had some whistleblowing activity going on, became high profile. One of the things he put in his newsletter and told me at the time regarding the future of Australia in terms of geopolitical structures, he said, this was in the late 80s, he said the plan for Australia that he'd been told was we would have a strong federal government, no state governments, all the councils would merge into super councils, and that we would get a consumption tax like a GST, which all came in. Now, I don't know whether you noticed what Kevin Rudd did and what a lot of the Liberal Party are doing, but they're basically nationalising and taking the powers away from a lot of the states and giving it to the federal bodies. So it looks good on the outside. You've got an educational curriculum which is standardised. You've got road laws which are standardised, accounting laws, health laws. In many ways you can see the practicalities. But one of the things a lot of people didn't twig with the mining tax that Kevin Rudd was very unpopular about was that was a tax which took the revenue from the mining companies and gave it to the federal government. At the moment, all the revenue from mining companies goes to state governments. So keep an eye on that. I was quite amazed when I saw super councils being formed and tested and being accepted. And there's more of that away, so I would say that agenda that we were told back in the 80s is the one that they're working on. And thanks, Jim, once more. Give him a hand on the way out. Thank you.